Finn was not supposed to be out that far. His orders were simple: check the eastern supply trail, mark any damage from the morning rockslide, and come back before dark. A 1-hour job. Maybe 2. Nothing complicated, nothing dangerous. Just a walk through rough terrain on a planet that smelled like burnt stone and old rain. Theris outpost was small. 12 people, 1 medical tent, 1 communication tower that broke every 3rd week. Finn had been stationed there for 4 months, patching up cuts and treating dust lung infections and watching alien cargo ships pass overhead like slow metal clouds. It was quiet work. Boring mostly. But Finn did not mind quiet. Quiet meant nobody was bleeding. He was on his way back when he saw the rocks. The landslide had come down hard on the eastern ridge. Boulders the size of ground vehicles had rolled and stacked against each other, crushing everything underneath. The path was completely blocked. Finn stopped, looked at it for a moment, then started climbing over the rubble to find a way around. That was when he heard it. Not a sound exactly. More like the feeling of a sound. A low, faint vibration that his ears almost missed. He stopped walking and stood very still. The wind moved through the rocks around him. The sky above was turning orange and dark. He waited. There it was again. He turned toward it and started moving carefully across the loose rocks, stepping slow, testing each stone before putting his weight down. The vibration was coming from somewhere underneath a large flat boulder that had landed sideways against 2 others, creating a small hollow underneath. Finn crouched down and looked inside. It was an egg. Large. About the size of a travel bag. Dark green and brown, with deep cracks running across the shell like broken glass that had not quite fallen apart yet. It was sitting in a shallow dip in the rock, completely exposed. No nest around it. No warmth. No parent anywhere near. Finn had seen dragon eggs before, in pictures and in one biology briefing he had half slept through. He knew enough to understand that a cracked egg left out in the cold was not a good situation. Dragon eggs needed heat. Constant heat. Their shells were tough, but the creature inside was not. He reached in and touched the shell. It was ice cold. He pulled his hand back and looked around. The ridge above was broken open where the slide had come from. There had probably been a nest up there, tucked into a warm rocky hollow near one of the thermal vents the planet was full of. The slide had destroyed it. This egg had rolled down and survived the fall only to land here in the cold open air. Finn looked at the cracks in the shell more carefully. Something had been trying to get out. The cracks were not from the fall. They were from the inside. Something small had been pushing. He sat back on his heels and thought for a moment. He opened his communicator and checked the signal. Weak but present. He sent a short message back to the outpost saying he had found something and would be late returning. Then he sat down next to the egg, took off his outer jacket and wrapped it carefully around the shell. He did not know if it would help. He was a human medic, not a dragon expert. He had no special tools, no heat lamp, no incubation equipment. What he had was a jacket, his own body warmth, and the kind of stubbornness that had always made his commanding officers slightly annoyed. The sky finished turning dark. The temperature dropped fast the way it always did on that planet once the sun was gone. Finn pulled the egg closer, tucking it against his side under his arm, keeping as much warmth around it as he could. He leaned his back against the big flat boulder and settled in. An hour passed. Then 2. Sarah's voice came through his communicator twice asking where he was. He told her he was fine, just dealing with something he would explain later. She said something sharp about him always dealing with something and then the signal cut out. The cracks in the shell were getting worse. He could see them spreading slowly in the light of his small torch. That should have been a bad sign. He told himself it might not be. He was not sure he believed it, but he told himself anyway. Around the middle of the night the egg started moving. Just slightly. A small shifting of weight, barely noticeable. Finn straightened up and looked down at it. He tightened his arms around it gently, trying to keep the heat steady. His back hurt. The rocks were not comfortable. He did not move. The movement came again. Stronger this time. A slow pushing from inside, steady and deliberate like something working very hard at a difficult problem. Finn watched the cracks. One of them widened. A small piece of shell broke away and fell onto his knee. He held his breath. Another piece broke. Then a larger one. Something dark and wet appeared in the gap. Small and trembling. A tiny clawed foot, pressing outward through the broken shell. Finn very carefully shifted his hold on the egg, giving the hatchling room to push without letting the cold air rush in too fast. He was not sure if that was the right thing to do. He just knew that sudden cold on a newborn anything was not good, and he was a medic and keeping things warm was something he understood. The shell broke open fully over the next few minutes. The hatchling fell forward into Finn's hands. It was small. Much smaller than he had expected. Dark gray and wet, with folded wings pressed flat against its back and a head that seemed slightly too large for its thin neck. Its eyes were closed. His chest was moving but barely. Each breath was shallow and uneven, like something that had almost run out of strength before it even started. It made a sound. Not a cry. Not anything dramatic. Just a very small, very quiet noise, like the hatchling was trying to say something and did not yet have the voice for it. Finn pulled it against his chest without thinking. He unzipped the front of his thermal underlayer and tucked the hatchling inside against his skin, the way he had once seen a nurse do with a premature infant years ago in a hospital back on Earth. Skin warmth. Direct. Steady. The best incubator he had. The hatchling shivered violently for several minutes. Finn sat completely still and let it shiver. He kept his hands pressed gently over it from outside the fabric, adding pressure without squeezing. He talked to it quietly. Nothing meaningful. Just words, spoken low and calm, the way he talked to patients who were scared or confused. It did not matter what he said. It never really did. What mattered was the sound. Something steady in the dark. The shivering slowed. Then it stopped. The hatchling's breathing changed. Still shallow but more even. More regular. It pressed its small head against Finn's chest and went still in the way that meant sleep, not stillness in the other way he had learned to recognize over years of field medicine. Finn let out a long breath. He looked up at the sky. No ships. No lights from the outpost. Just stars, cold and very far away the way stars always looked on nights like this one. He adjusted his position against the boulder, trying to find something close to comfortable. He did not find it. He stayed anyway. He stayed because the hatchling was still breathing. That was the only reason he needed. He had not saved it because of dragon politics or interspecies protocol or any regulation in the relief outpost handbook. He had not thought about life debts or clan laws or what Elder Aldrich would say when he found out. He had not thought about much at all, really. He had heard something that was almost a sound and he had gone toward it, and now there was a living thing asleep on his chest that had not been alive an hour ago. That was all. By the time the sky started going pale again at the edges, Finn's legs were completely numb and his back felt like it had been rebuilt incorrectly. He did not care. He looked down at the hatchling tucked against him, its tiny sides rising and falling in the slow rhythm of deep sleep, its small claws hooked lightly into the fabric of his underlayer. He stayed until the sun came up. Then he stood up slowly, carefully, keeping one hand pressed over the hatchling so it would not fall, and he started walking back toward the outpost. He had a lot of explaining to do. He found he did not mind that at all. Sarah saw him coming from the outpost door. She had been standing there for a while, arms crossed, expression somewhere between worried and annoyed in the specific way that only people who had known Finn for a long time could manage. She watched him walk up the path in the early morning light, moving carefully, one hand pressed against the front of his jacket like he was holding something injured. She looked at his face, then at his jacket, then back at his face. "What is under your shirt?" she said. It was not really a question. Finn opened the door and walked past her without answering. He went straight to the medical tent, sat down on the low supply crate he used as a chair when the actual chairs were taken, and very carefully unzipped his underlayer. The hatchling inside shifted and made a small unhappy noise at the sudden light. Sarah stood in the doorway of the tent and stared. "Finn. I know. That is a dragon. I know. A baby dragon." "Hatchling," Finn said. "Technically." He was already looking around the tent for supplies, moving with the calm, focused energy he always had when there was a patient in front of him. He pulled a thermal blanket from the lower shelf and folded it into a thick nest shape in a shallow supply crate. He set the hatchling down gently in the middle of it. The hatchling immediately curled into a tight ball and went back to sleep. Sarah walked over slowly and looked down at it. Her expression had changed. It was still complicated, but the annoyed part had gotten smaller. "Where did you find it?" she said. "Eastern Ridge. Under the slide." "Alone?" The nest was gone. Whole thermal hollow came down. He was checking the hatchling over carefully now, running his hands lightly along its sides, checking its breathing, looking at the places where the shell had broken. There were small raw patches on its skin where the cracking had been rough. Nothing deep. Nothing that could not heal. It was almost gone when I found it. Temperature was too far down. Sarah pulled up a stool and sat beside him. She watched him work. After a moment she said, "What are you going to feed it?" Finn paused. He had not gotten that far yet. They figured it out over the next 2 hours. The outpost had a small database of alien species biology and Finn went through it carefully while Sarah warmed the tent and kept checking on the hatchling. Dragon hatchlings in the first days needed protein, warmth, and very little else. The outpost had emergency ration packs that included processed meat concentrate, originally intended for the 2 large alien workers on the supply crew. Finn broke a small amount down with water until it was soft enough and tried offering it to the hatchling on the end of a spoon. The hatchling woke up, looked at the spoon, looked at Finn, and then ate the entire portion in about 4 seconds. Sarah laughed. It was the first time Finn had heard her laugh in about 3 weeks, and it sounded good in the small warm tent. He named the hatchling Zyron that evening. It was not a dragon name. He knew that. It was just the closest thing he could make from the sound the hatchling kept producing, a low humming noise somewhere in the back of its throat that it made when it was content. Zyron. It fit the shape of the sound well enough. The hatchling did not object. The days that followed were busy in the quiet particular way that caring for something small and newly alive always was. Finn fed Zyron every 3 hours. He kept the thermal crate at the right temperature, checked it 4 times a day, and slept with one ear open in case the hatchling made any sounds that were different from the normal ones. Zyron grew faster than Finn expected. In the first week he went from fitting easily in 2 cupped hands to being about the size of a large cat. His color deepened from pale gray to a dark greenish brown. His wings, which had been completely flat and folded against his back at birth, began to open slightly when he stretched, like someone slowly learning to use new fingers. He followed Finn everywhere. This was inconvenient in the medical tent, where Zyron had a habit of sitting directly on top of whatever Finn was trying to work on. It was less inconvenient outside, where the hatchling would walk at Finn's heel and stop when Finn stopped and look at whatever Finn was looking at with complete seriousness, as if he was also assessing the situation. Sarah said it was the funniest thing she had ever seen. Finn said it was a medical complication. Neither of them really meant what they said. On the 9th day Aldrich came. Finn was outside the tent doing equipment checks when he heard it. A sound like large wings, and then a shadow that blocked the sun completely for several seconds, and then a landing that shook the ground hard enough to rattle the supply crates inside the tent. Finn straightened up and turned around. Aldrich was enormous. Finn had seen full-grown dragons from a distance before. It was different up close. Aldrich was old, with scales that had gone dark and dull at the edges the way old things go, and eyes that were a deep amber color and missed nothing. He stood at the edge of the outpost clearing and looked at Finn with an expression that was very hard to read. Behind Finn the tent flap moved. Zyron pushed through it and stood beside Finn's leg. Aldrich looked at the hatchling for a long moment. Then he looked at Finn. Then back at the hatchling. Something moved across the old dragon's face that Finn could not name. He stepped forward slowly and lowered his head until it was level with Finn, which meant it was slightly below Finn's chest height because Aldrich's neck alone was twice the length of the medical tent. He looked at Zyron closely for a long time. Zyron looked back at him without moving. Not scared. Just watching. Then Aldrich straightened up and looked at Finn directly. His voice came out deep and slow, translated through the small implant behind Finn's ear in flat but understandable words. This hatchling is from the Vorkai Eastern Clutch. The slide destroyed the nest 11 days ago. We searched but found no survivors. Pause. You found him. Under the rocks, Finn said. East Ridge. Alone. Yes. Aldrich was quiet for a moment. The amber eyes moved over Finn in a way that felt like being read rather than looked at. Why? The elder said. You are a human. A field medic. This was not your animal. Not your responsibility. The egg was cold. Why did you not leave it? Finn thought about the question for a second. Not because it was hard. Because he was trying to find the shortest true answer. It was still breathing, he said. Aldrich said nothing. Finn kept going, not to fill the silence just because it seemed like the rest needed to be said. I heard something when I was climbing over the rocks. I went toward it. The egg was cracked and cold but there was still movement inside. I did what I could. He shrugged slightly. That is all. The elder dragon looked at him for a long time after that. Then he looked at Zyron again. Zyron had sat down on Finn's boot at some point during the conversation and was watching Aldrich with calm, steady eyes. He must come back with us, Aldrich said. He belongs with his kind. He must learn what he is. I know, Finn said. He had known it was coming. He had known it since the first morning, really. He had never thought of Zyron as his. He had thought of him as a patient, and patients recovered and left, and that was the whole point. That was what you worked toward. Aldrich reached out one enormous claw and touched the ground in front of Zyron very gently. The hatchling stood up, walked forward, and sniffed the claw carefully. Then he turned around and walked back to Finn and pressed his head against Finn's hand. Finn crouched down and put his palm flat against the top of Zyron's head for a moment. Warm. Solid. Alive. Then he stood up and stepped back. Go on, he said quietly. Zyron looked up at him once. Then he walked to Aldrich and the old dragon curled one great wing around him and lifted off slowly, the downwash flattening the grass of the clearing in wide circles. Finn stood and watched until they were gone. Sarah came and stood beside him. She did not say anything. Neither did he. It was a good silence. The kind that only comes after something has gone right. 14 years changed a person. Finn knew this the way most field medics knew it, not as an idea but as something he felt in his hands when he worked and in his back when he tried to sleep on hard ground. He was 36 now. The kind of tired that did not fully go away with rest anymore. The kind of careful that came from seeing too many things go wrong too fast. He had been on Theris 4 for 2 months. It was not a good planet. It was gray and flat and cold in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. The colony there had been trying to hold a supply corridor open for almost a year, and the Shriven Collective had been trying to close it for just as long. The result was a war that moved back and forth across the same 10 kilometers of broken ground like a slow, terrible tide, and Finn was somewhere in the middle of it with a medical kit and a rifle he used far less than the kit. His unit was small. 8 people. Good people, most of them. Ren was the youngest, 22. A soldier who had joined up because she believed in something and had not yet had enough time to get that belief worn down to something quieter. She reminded Finn of nobody he had known before, which he thought was probably a good thing. They had been pushing through the collapsed industrial district on the western edge of the main settlement when everything went wrong. It happened fast. It always happened fast. One moment the unit was moving in good order through the ruins of what had once been a processing facility, gray walls and broken pipes and the smell of old chemicals. And the next moment the Shriven were everywhere, coming in from 3 directions at once with the kind of coordination that meant they had known the unit was coming long before the unit knew they were there. Someone had talked. Or a sensor had been compromised. Or they had simply been unlucky. In a war that had been going the wrong way for a year, unlucky was not a difficult thing to be. The fight lasted about 4 minutes. Finn spent most of it behind a collapsed wall, pulling people back, doing the fast rough work of keeping the living alive long enough to move. He had a cut across his left arm from something he did not see coming and a ringing in his right ear from an explosion that had gone off closer than it should have. He kept working. By the time the noise stopped there were 3 of them left. Then 2. Then Finn heard Ren's voice cut out mid-sentence on the communicator and there was only him. He stayed behind the wall for a long time without moving. The Shriven did not come for him immediately. They were securing the outer positions probably the way they always did. Thorough and slow and very sure of themselves. They would get to him. There was nowhere for him to go. The corridor behind him was collapsed. The open ground in front was watched. His communicator was showing 1 bar of signal, barely enough to receive, probably not enough to send clearly. He tried anyway. He opened the command channel and gave his position and situation in short flat words. Unit destroyed. 1 survivor. Sector compromised. Requesting extraction or support. He repeated it twice and then stopped because repeating it a 3rd time would not change anything. The response came back after a long pause. Broken up. Hard to understand. But the meaning was clear enough. His sector had been reclassified. Resources were committed elsewhere. Hold position if possible. Hold position if possible. Finn looked at the wall he was sitting against. There was a hole in it near the bottom where something had blown through. Through the hole he could see a stretch of open gray ground and beyond that the dark shapes of Shriven soldiers moving between ruins. 3 of them visible. Probably more he could not see. He put his back against the wall and did a quick check of himself. The cut on his arm was not deep enough to be serious but it had bled more than he would have liked and his sleeve was stiff with it. His right knee had taken a knock at some point and was swollen enough to make moving fast difficult. His kit was mostly intact. His rifle had half a charge left. None of it mattered very much if extraction was not coming. He thought about Ren. She had been good at her job and had believed in something and had been 22 years old. He thought about the others too, each of them for a moment, the way he had learned to do in the field. Quick and honest. Then he put it away. There was nothing he could do for them now. He opened his personal beacon. It was separate from the military communicator, a small civilian emergency unit clipped to his belt that he had carried for years mostly as a habit. It had its own signal, independent of the military network, broadcasting on a broad emergency frequency that theoretically any ship or station within a certain range could pick up. Theoretically. He activated it. The little light on it blinked steady red. Broadcasting. Into what, he was not sure. Into the gray sky above Theris 4 and whatever was beyond it and probably nothing that was going to do him any good in the next 20 minutes. He set it on the ground beside him and leaned his head back against the wall. The cold of the stone came through his jacket. The ringing in his ear was getting quieter, which was either his hearing coming back or something worse. His arm had stopped bleeding, which was good. His knee hurt steadily and without drama, the way injuries did when they were not going to kill you but were going to make everything harder. He thought, for no reason he could explain, about the eastern ridge on the Vorkai outpost. The cold rocks and the dark sky and the egg wrapped in his jacket. He thought about the feeling of something small and alive pressing against his chest in the dark, the weight of it, the warmth. He thought about standing in the clearing watching Aldrich lift off, Zyron a small dark shape against the gray sky getting smaller and smaller until it was gone. He had never heard anything after that. No news, no contact. Dragon clans did not send updates. The universe did not follow up. He wondered, in the absent way of someone who does not really expect an answer, where Zyron was now. 14 years. A dragon hatchling 14 years on would be grown. Not fully mature, not by dragon reckoning, but grown enough. Strong enough. He had no idea what Zyron would look like now, or if Zyron remembered anything, or if dragon memory even worked the way human memory did. He wondered if Zyron ever thought about the night he was born. The cold. The dark. The heartbeat. Probably not. It seemed like too much to expect. A sound from somewhere to his left made him go still. Footsteps on broken stone. Careful and slow. The Shriven were getting closer, working their way through the ruins section by section. He had maybe 10 minutes before they reached his position, possibly less. He picked up his rifle and checked the charge again. He could make it mean something if he had to. He was not the kind of person who sat quietly and accepted things without at least making them complicated for the other side. But he was also realistic. One man, one position, half a rifle charge and a bad knee. The math was not good. He put the rifle across his knees and looked up at the hole in the wall. A narrow strip of sky was visible through it. Gray and flat, the way the sky over Theris 4 always was. A few high clouds moving slowly. Nothing else. He activated the beacon one more time manually, sending a fresh pulse out. The red light blinked. Steady. Quiet. Going nowhere probably. He closed his eyes. Not giving up. That was not what it was. He was just being still for a moment. Saving what was left. A field medic learned early that there were situations where the most useful thing you could do was stop spending energy on things that were not helping and wait for the situation to change. Sometimes the situation changed. Usually it did not. The footsteps were closer now. He could hear voices, low and sharp in the Shriven language, communicating positions. They were organized. They were good at this. He had known that already. He kept his eyes closed. The beacon blinked its red light into the cold air of Theris 4 and sent its small signal up through the gray clouds and out into the space above the planet and into whatever was listening. The footsteps got closer. And then, from somewhere very far above, there was a sound. Not an explosion. Not a ship engine. Something older than both of those things. Something that moved through the air in a way that made the air itself feel different, heavier and more alive, the way the sky feels just before a storm breaks. Finn opened his eyes. Through the hole in the wall, the gray sky was no longer empty. There were shadows in it. Moving fast. And they were getting bigger. The shadows came in fast and low. Finn pressed his eye to the hole in the wall and watched them cross the sky above Theris 4, one after another, dark shapes moving against the gray clouds with a speed and purpose that did not belong to any aircraft he had ever seen. They were not flying in formation the way military ships did. They were flying the way living things flew, each one slightly different, each one moving with its own weight and rhythm, wings cutting the air in long powerful strokes. He counted without meaning to. 1, 3, 7, 12. More behind those. His brain was slow to accept what his eyes were telling him. Dragons. A full flight of dragons, coming in from the high atmosphere at an angle that meant they had been descending for a while, building speed, using the clouds as cover. Whoever was leading them knew exactly what they were doing. The approach was perfect. Low enough to be fast, high enough to see everything below, timed so that the Shriven on the ground would have almost no warning before they arrived. The Shriven heard them first. Finn heard the change in the voices outside. The organized, confident communication of soldiers working through a controlled situation suddenly shifted into something sharper. Shorter. Questions being asked fast. Then commands. Then something that sounded like none of those things and was probably just fear. The first dragon hit the outer Shriven line like a falling mountain. Finn felt it through the ground. A deep hard impact that shook dust from the broken walls around him and rattled the ceiling above. He heard the sound of it a half-second later, a massive concussive crash that rolled across the industrial district like the loudest thunder he had ever heard. Then fire. A long controlled burst of it, bright even through the hole in the wall, lighting the gray day up orange and gold for several seconds. Then the others arrived. It was not a battle after that. Not in any way that the word battle usually meant. The Shriven had weapons and training and positions. They had been good soldiers doing a controlled operation in terrain they had prepared. None of that mattered very much in the next 4 minutes. Dragons did not fight the way armies fought. They did not hold lines or advance carefully or worry about crossfire. They came in hard and fast and with complete commitment, and the Shriven positions that had seemed solid and permanent simply stopped existing one after another. Finn stayed behind his wall. He was not hiding. There was nothing cowardly about recognizing that a man with half a rifle charge and a swollen knee had no useful role in what was currently happening outside. He stayed where he was and kept his head down and listened to the sounds of the Shriven Collective's Western operation on Theris 4 being completely and efficiently destroyed. It took less time than he expected. The sounds changed. The weapons fire dropped off and then stopped. The voices that had been shouting commands outside went quiet. The fire sounds faded. What was left was the sound of large wings moving at low speed, the deep steady percussion of dragons landing and repositioning, and a silence that felt completely different from the silence that had been there before. That silence had felt like waiting to die. This one felt like something else entirely. Finn stayed still for another full minute. Old field instinct. He had learned a long time ago never to be the first one to move when things went quiet, because quiet was sometimes a trap and the only way to find out was to wait and see if the quiet held. He got up slowly, putting his weight carefully on his good leg, and moved to the gap in the ruined wall that was large enough to step through. He came out into the open and stopped. The industrial district looked like something had swept through it with complete authority. Shriven equipment was scattered and broken across the open ground. The positions they had been using were gone. 3 dragons were visible in the middle distance, settled on the rubble, watching the outer perimeter with the calm steady attention of creatures that had already decided the situation was handled. There were no Shriven standing anywhere that Finn could see. He looked across the broken ground and then he saw it. One dragon, larger than the others, standing apart from the group on a flat stretch of open ground about 60 meters from where Finn had come out. It was facing him. It had been facing him, Finn thought, since before he came through the wall. Like it had known exactly where he was going to appear. It was enormous. That was the first thing. Bigger than any dragon he had seen in pictures or briefings. Dark greenish-brown, the color of deep forest shadow, with scales that had the particular texture of something that had been through a great deal and come through it intact. There were scars visible even from this distance, long pale lines across the shoulders and neck where old wounds had healed over. The wings were folded now but massive, the leading edges thick and powerful. Its eyes were fixed on Finn. Even from 60 meters away he could feel the weight of that attention. It was not threatening. It was something else. Something more specific than threatening. It was recognition. Finn walked toward it. His knee slowed him down and he did not try to hurry. He walked across the broken ground through the settling dust of what had just happened and the dragon stood completely still and watched him come the entire way. The other dragons in the distance did not move. The whole scene had a strange quiet quality, like the world was holding its breath. He stopped about 5 meters away. Up close the dragon was even larger than he had understood from a distance. The head alone was bigger than Finn's entire body. The eyes were a deep amber color, warm and direct, with a focus in them that was nothing like an animal's focus. This was the attention of something that thought, that remembered, that understood the weight of the current moment completely. Finn looked at those eyes. He felt something move in his chest that he could not immediately name. A kind of recognition that started in his memory before his conscious mind caught up with it. The color of those eyes. The particular way the head was held. Something in the shape of the face under all that grown and scarred armor of scale and time. He knew those eyes. He had looked into them 14 years ago in a medical tent on a cold outpost, when they had been new and barely open and trying to focus on the face of the first living thing they had ever seen. His voice came out quieter than he intended. Zyron. The dragon lowered his head. Not the way a creature bows under pressure or out of submission. The way something chooses to make itself level with something it considers equal. Slow and deliberate, the great head coming down until it rested on the ground directly in front of Finn's feet, those amber eyes looking straight up at him from below. Finn could not move for a moment. The translation implant behind his ear activated as Zyron spoke, the deep harmonic sound of dragon language converting into words that arrived quiet and clear and with a weight behind them that the flat translated words could only partially carry. I found you. I have always been looking. Finn stood there in the broken dust of Theris 4 and felt 14 years collapse into a single point. the cold ridge, the cracked egg, the tiny creature shivering against his chest in the dark. The morning he had stood in the clearing and watched Aldrich carry Zyron away into the gray sky and told himself that was the right ending, the only ending, and believed it because he had to. He crouched down. It brought him level with Zyron's face. He reached out slowly and put his hand flat against the side of the great head, against the scales that were warm and solid and real under his palm. He felt the deep vibration of Zyron breathing, steady and strong, the same low hum he had named the hatchling after 14 years ago in a different life. His throat was doing something inconvenient. He waited for it to stop. "You came a long way," Finn said. The amber eyes looked at him with complete steadiness. "You were cold once," Zyron said. "You stayed anyway. I have been looking at every signal from every system along the frontier for 3 years. Waiting for your name." Pause. "Your beacon reached me 4 hours ago." Finn looked at the small civilian emergency unit still clipped to his belt. The little red light was still blinking. He had almost left it behind on the ground when he stood up. He thought about that for a moment. "4 hours," he said. "I came as fast as I could," Zyron said. Simple. Direct. With no drama around it, the way true things rarely needed drama. Finn kept his hand where it was. He looked at this enormous, scarred, magnificent creature that had once fit inside his jacket and had once pressed its tiny head against his hand in a medical tent on a cold outpost and had apparently spent years listening for a name in a war it had no obligation to enter. He had no words big enough for what he was feeling. So he said the only thing that felt honest. "I'm glad you found me," Finn said quietly. Zyron closed his eyes for a moment under Finn's hand. The low hum deepened. Content. The same sound it had always been, just larger now, resonating up through the ground and into Finn's bones. Outside on the perimeter, the other dragons held their positions and watched the horizon. The gray sky over Theris 4 was quiet. For the first time in a very long time, Finn was not alone in it. The Elder Council met 3 days after Theris 4. The location was a place called Vorkai Deep, a wide natural plateau high in the mountain range where the dragon clans had gathered for important matters for longer than any written record could confirm. The stone there was old and dark, worn smooth in places by centuries of large bodies settling onto it. The wind moved across it constantly, cold and clean, carrying the smell of altitude and distance. Finn had not been told he was coming until the morning of. Zyron had simply appeared at the temporary human camp where Finn was recovering, lowered himself to the ground and waited. One of the other soldiers had come to find Finn with an expression that suggested he was not entirely sure what the correct protocol was for informing a senior medic that a very large dragon was sitting outside and appeared to be waiting for him specifically. Finn had put down his medical report, picked up his jacket and gone outside. He had not asked where they were going. He trusted Zyron the way he trusted his own hands without thinking about it, without needing reasons. That kind of trust did not come from knowing someone a long time. It came from something quieter and more specific. He had held Zyron at the beginning of everything. Whatever came next, he was not afraid of it. The flight to Vorkai Deep took 2 hours. Finn had never ridden a dragon before. It was not like anything else he had experienced. Not like aircraft, which pushed against the air mechanically and shook with the effort. Zyron moved through the sky the way water moves through a channel, smooth and certain and completely at home. Finn sat low between the raised scales at the base of Zyron's neck, out of the worst of the wind, and watched the world below get small and then disappear into cloud and then reappear again as something different, all ridges and shadow and ancient stone. He thought about nothing in particular. He just looked. When they landed on the plateau, the council was already assembled. There were 7 of them. All elders, all large, all very still in the way that powerful things were still when they were paying close attention. They were arranged in a loose half-circle on the far side of the plateau, each one settled onto the worn stone with the particular settled quality of creatures who had been doing important things in important places for a very long time. Finn recognized Aldrich immediately. The old dragon had aged in 14 years. His scales were darker at the edges now, and there was a heaviness around his eyes that had not been there before. But he was still enormous, still sharp in his attention, and when his amber gaze moved to Finn as Zyron landed, there was something in it that Finn could not immediately read. Zyron walked to the center of the half-circle and stopped. Finn stayed at his side. The council elder who spoke first was not Aldrich. It was a larger dragon on the left side of the group, with pale gray scales and eyes that were a cold light blue. Her voice through Finn's translation implant was flat and precise. "The matter before this council is the Declaration of Guardian Bond," she said. "Made by Zyron of the Vorkai Eastern Line, directed toward the human known as Finn. This council is convened to hear the declaration and determine its standing. A second elder spoke before she had fully finished. He was dark-scaled and heavy-set, and his voice had an edge in it that did not bother to hide its position. The standing is clear before we begin. Guardian Bond is the oldest covenant in dragon law. It has never in recorded history been extended to a non-dragon. The precedent does not exist because the situation was never considered possible. It was not considered, a third elder said, because it was not considered appropriate. The blue-eyed elder looked at Finn directly. You understand what is being claimed on your behalf. Zyron explained it to me, Finn said. And you understand that some members of this council believe it cannot be done. I understood that before I arrived, Finn said. I came anyway. There was a brief silence. The dark-scaled elder looked at him with an expression that was not hostile exactly but was not warm either. A guardian bond is not a gesture. It is not gratitude. It is a permanent covenant that binds the declaring dragon to the protection of one individual above all other obligations. Above clan duty. Above personal safety. It is the most serious declaration in our law. He paused. It has never been given to a human because humans do not live long enough, do not matter enough in the long scale of things, and because no human has ever done anything that warranted it. The last words landed with a deliberate weight. Finn did not respond to them. He had learned a long time ago that responding to provocations was usually less useful than letting them sit in the air where everyone could look at them. Zyron responded instead. He did not raise his voice. He did not shift his position or make any gesture that communicated aggression. He simply began to speak, low and steady, in a tone that had the quality of something that had been held for a long time and was now being set down carefully in a place where it would not be moved. He described the night he was born. He described it in detail that Finn had not expected, because Finn had assumed that a creature born in crisis and half dead from cold would have no clear memory of it. But Zyron described it with a precision and specificity that made it clear the memory had not faded even slightly in 14 years. The cold of the stone. The darkness under the rock. The cracks spreading across the shell from the inside and the exhaustion of pushing when there was almost nothing left to push with. He described the sound of footsteps stopping above him. He described the warmth coming through the shell before it broke open. A human body, pressed against the outside of the egg in the dark, giving what heat it had to something it could not even see properly, something that was not its species, not its responsibility, not its anything. He described being lifted into hands that were careful without being hesitant. The feeling of being held against a heartbeat. The warmth spreading through his body the way life spreads, slow and then all at once. The sound of a voice talking quietly in the dark, not because there was anything useful to say but because silence was not something the human was willing to offer. He described falling asleep to that heartbeat. The plateau was completely quiet. The dark-scaled elder who had spoken about precedent and appropriateness had not moved, but something in his stillness had changed quality. He was listening the way someone listens when they have stopped preparing their next argument and are simply taking in what is being said. Zyron finished by saying this. I remember every moment of that night. I have always remembered it. While I was learning to fly and learning to fight and learning what I was, that memory was the first thing I knew. It was cold. He stayed. That is the whole of it. He paused. You ask what a human has done to warrant a guardian bond. I am the answer to that question. I am here because he stayed. The silence after that was long. It was Aldrich who moved first. The old dragon rose slowly from his settled position and walked to the center of the plateau. He walked past the other council members and past Zyron and stopped directly in front of Finn. He was so large that standing this close he blocked out most of the sky. Finn looked up at him and waited. Aldrich lowered his head. All the way down. Until the great ancient nose was nearly touching the stone at Finn's feet. A full bow, slow and deliberate, from the eldest member of the Vorkai Elder Council. Held for several seconds. Then he raised his head again and looked at Finn with those amber eyes that had not changed in 14 years. He said nothing. He did not need to. He walked back to his position and settled again and looked at the rest of the council with an expression that communicated everything his silence had not bothered to put into words. The blue-eyed elder looked at the others. Then she looked at Finn. Then she looked at Zyron. The guardian bond stands, she said. No one argued. Zyron turned to Finn and lowered his head in the same gesture he had made on the broken ground of Theris 4. The gesture of a choice freely made. The gesture of something decided long ago and now simply being confirmed in the proper place. Finn put his hand on Zyron's head. The wind moved across Vorkai deep, cold and clean, carrying nothing but distance. Above them the sky was very wide and very clear. Word travels fast in a war. It does not travel through official channels or command reports or the kind of formal communications that get filed and archived and read by people sitting in safe rooms far from the actual fighting. It travels the way all important information travels in places where people are trying to stay alive. Quietly, quickly, from one person to the next, passed along in the spaces between orders and briefings and the long waiting that made up most of what war actually was. The word that traveled after Theris 4 was simple. Do not touch the human with the dragon shadow. It started with the shriven soldiers who had survived the Western District operation. Not many of them, but enough. They had gone back to their own lines and their own commanders and given their accounts of what had happened, and those accounts had been the same regardless of who was telling them. A standard elimination sweep on a compromised human position. Controlled. Certain. And then the sky had come apart and something had arrived that their weapons could not stop and their training had not prepared them for, and it had all been because of one human field medic sitting behind a broken wall with a civilian beacon clipped to his belt. The shriven command had pulled his file after that. What they found there did not make them feel better. A field medic. 36 years old. 14 years of service across 6 conflict zones. No remarkable combat record. No special designation. Nothing that would explain why a full dragon flight had appeared out of high atmosphere to pull him out of a situation that had been completely sealed. They did not understand it. That was fine. They did not need to understand it. They just needed to know it was real, and they did, and the instruction went quietly through their ranks the way important instructions did. That specific human. Leave him alone. Whatever he has, we do not want to find out more about it the hard way. Finn did not know about any of this for several months. He was busy. The Guardian Bond changed things in practical terms that he had not fully anticipated. Zyron was present in a way that was constant and specific. Not hovering. Not intrusive. But always there, in the sky above whatever position Finn was working in, visible if you looked up, present in the particular way that made everyone around Finn aware that the sky was occupied and had opinions. Other soldiers noticed it within the first week. They noticed that Zyron tracked Finn's position at all times, circling high when things were quiet, dropping lower when the situation on the ground became complicated. They noticed that on 3 separate occasions when enemy units had approached Finn's medical position from directions that the ground teams had not yet detected, Zyron had landed between them and the threat before a single shot was fired, and that on all 3 occasions the enemy units had chosen a different course of action very quickly. They started calling it the Shadow. Not officially. Just among themselves, the way soldiers name things that did not have official names yet. The Shadow. As in, watch where the shadow is. As in, if the shadow drops, something is coming. As in, you want to set up your medical post somewhere the shadow can see it. Finn pretended not to know about the nickname. He mostly succeeded. The work itself did not change. That was the thing he came back to when people asked him what it was like, operating with a Guardian Bond, having a dragon at permanent station above him. The work was the same. Injured people needed the same things they had always needed. Clean wounds, correct pressure, the right medication at the right time, and someone who was not panicking. Finn had been providing those things for 14 years and he continued to provide them. He was just harder to kill now. That mattered more than he said out loud. He had lost people over the years. Colleagues. Patients he could not get to in time. People who had died in the gap between when something went wrong and when help arrived. Every field medic carried those losses in a specific way, not dramatically, just as a permanent weight that you learned to work around. Finn carried his the same way everyone did. But since Theris 4, since Zyron, the gap had gotten smaller. When Finn sent a signal, something answered it now. Not in 4 hours. In minutes sometimes. Zyron had senses that no human instrument could match, could read the ground below from altitude in ways that gave Finn information before the situation had fully developed. 3 times in the months after Theris 4, that early information had meant the difference between getting to a wounded soldier and not getting there. 3 people who were alive because the shadow had seen something coming. Finn thought about that sometimes. He thought about it the way he thought about the egg on the cold ridge. The small choices. The staying when you could have walked away. The ripples that went out from a single decision and touched things you would never be able to predict or trace. He had stayed one night because something was still breathing. And now there were 3 people alive who would not otherwise be. He did not talk about this. It was not the kind of thing he talked about. He just worked and let Zyron hold the sky and tried to do the job as well as it could be done. The war began to change in the 8th month after Theris 4. The Shriven Collective had been pushing along the frontier for almost 2 years. They were organized and well supplied and they had been winning more than they were losing. But a war is not only about weapons and supply lines. It is also about will, about whether the people fighting believe the outcome is certain, and the dragon flights that had begun appearing alongside human units in 3 separate sectors had done something to that belief that no military strategist had fully accounted for. Dragons did not appear on any shriven equipment list. They were not part of any human military alliance that the collective had prepared for. They were something outside the calculation, and things outside the calculation had a particular effect on the kind of confidence that a long winning streak produced. The collective began pulling back from certain positions. Not retreating. They were too disciplined for retreat. But consolidating. Reassessing. Choosing engagements more carefully. The corridor on Theris 4 held. Then the supply lines behind it held. Then 3 other positions that had been sliding the wrong way for months began to stabilize. Nobody announced that the tide had turned. Nobody made speeches. The people on the ground just noticed that the math was different and kept working. Finn kept working. On a morning in the 9th month he was moving through the ruins of a small settlement on the edge of the Theris system, a colony town that had been caught between 2 advancing lines and had paid the price that settlements caught between advancing lines always paid. The buildings were broken open. The streets were full of debris. The air smelled of smoke and the particular chemical sharpness of weapons discharge. His team was doing a sweep for survivors. They had found 2 adults in the first hour, both injured, both stable enough to move. They were working through the eastern section of the settlement when Finn stopped. He had heard something. He stood still and listened the way he had learned to listen on a cold ridge 14 years ago, going quiet inside, waiting for the sound to come again. It came. Faint. From under a collapsed section of wall to his left. He was already moving before he had consciously decided to. He crossed to the rubble and started shifting pieces carefully, the way you shifted rubble when you did not know what was underneath and did not want to make anything worse. His team member started to help and Finn directed him to the other side without looking up, talking fast and low, already running the assessment in his head. The gap opened after 2 minutes of careful work. Inside it, curled into the smallest shape it could make itself, was a child. Alien, not human, with the pale gray coloring and wide dark eyes of one of the species from the inner colony worlds whose name Finn could never pronounce correctly. Small. Maybe 4 or 5 years old in equivalent terms. Conscious. Frightened. A wound on its left side that had bled heavily and stopped, which meant either it had clotted well or something worse. Finn went in without hesitation. He moved in close and kept his voice low and steady and calm, the same voice he had used 14 years ago in the dark with a dying hatchling, the voice that did not require a shared language to communicate the most important thing, which was that he was not going anywhere. He worked quickly and carefully. The wound was deep but clean. No organ involvement. Serious but survivable with the right care. He worked through his kit with the efficiency of someone who had done this so many times it lived in his hands rather than his thoughts, and the child watched him with those wide dark eyes and gradually, slowly, stopped shaking. He did not notice the silence outside until it had been there for a while. No weapons fire. No movement sounds. Nothing. He looked up through the gap in the rubble at the sky above the ruined settlement. Zyron was there. Settled on the remains of a building wall perhaps 30 meters away, wings folded, absolutely still, watching the surrounding area with the quiet total attention of something that had already assessed everything within a considerable distance and found it not worth being concerned about. The amber eyes moved across the ruins with slow steady sweeps. Nothing came close. Nothing tried. The other soldiers in Finn's team were working nearby, doing their jobs, and they did not look nervous. You did not look nervous when the shadow was settled and still. You just did your work. Finn looked at Zyron for a moment. Zyron did not look back. He was watching the perimeter. That was his job and he was doing it with the complete commitment he brought to everything, the same complete commitment that had kept a civilian beacon signal in his attention for 3 years across a dozen systems until one morning on Theris 4 it had finally broadcast a name he recognized. Finn looked back down at the child. The small face was calmer now. The shaking had stopped. Dark eyes watched him with the particular trust that injured things gave to the person helping them, unconditional and complete, and one of the heaviest things Finn had ever learned to carry. He finished his work and sat back and just stayed for a moment. He thought about cold eggs and warm chests and a heartbeat in the dark. He thought about Aldrich bowing his head on a windswept plateau without a word. He thought about 3 people alive because a shadow had seen something coming. He thought about how small decisions made in the dark had a way of becoming large things in the light, if you waited long enough and kept doing the work. He did not think about any of this for long. There was too much still to do. He picked the child up carefully and stood and carried it back toward where the rest of the team was working. Above the ruined settlement, Zyron watched the horizon. The sky over Theris was quiet. Nothing came close. Nothing dared.